just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. Friday Java. On the 10th of August, 2000, coming to you from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Excuse me. We have the crystal ball that is from Dr. Larry Sabato's shop at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. And every time we do this presentation, we honor Heber Heyer, who was killed in Charlottesville by neo-Nazis, white supremacists, etc. A very unfortunate situation. Dr. Sabato and the Crystal Ball are covering incumbent governors and the various machinations behind them. We'll start off out of the Wichita newspaper in Wichita, Kansas, the Eagle. Nonetheless, this is the Secretary of State there, Chris Kobach. Kobach is an ally of DJ Trump. He led a so-called voter fraud commission that collapsed around him like a $2 suitcase in the rain, as LBJ would say. Kobach is running for governor of Kansas against the current governor there in Kansas, Jeff Collier. Nonetheless, the debate is, will Kobach recuse himself? Let me just read from the Wichita Eagle here. Kobach said he would recuse himself in an interview with CNN after Collier had sent a letter demanding that he do it and refraining from instructing county election officials on counting of ballots in the primary race for governor. On a day when voter totals narrowed to roughly 100, I saw another dispatch here. It was less than that. As multiple counties reported, vote totals were incorrect. happy to recuse myself, but I said it really doesn't make any difference. My office doesn't count votes. The counties do. That's according to Kobach. And in an interview with Chris Como, Comer's spokesman Kendall Marr told the Star that the governor had not been notified by Kobach's office, by Kobach or his office, that he intended to recuse himself. He said Collier's team found out via press reports. We don't have an official recusal here, Marr said. We want to see what that looks like tomorrow. Marr added that on top of the recusal, we're asking that the Secretary of State stop giving instructions to the counties, particularly relating to mail-in ballots. This is a very interesting race here. Recounts, no doubt, will occur and possibly in court. Don't know the implications of the Kansas law. Nonetheless, Collier released a letter at 5 p.m. calling on Kobach to recuse himself from providing advice to local election officials. The letter comes after multiple counties reported that the election night totals on the Secretary of State's website were incorrect. That can be seen as voter suppression. It's come to my attention that your office is giving advice to county election officials as recently as a conference call yesterday. You are making public statements on national TV which are inconsistent with Kansas law, and it may serve to suppress the vote in the ongoing primary process. That was what's in Governor Collier's letter. Ma explained a phone call with the campaign heard that Kobach's office told county clerks to disregard ballots with smudged postmarks. He said ballots received before Friday's deadline need to be counted. The county clerk in Douglas counties said that the recommendation was they could not be provided, so could possibly not count, but those are still taken to the Board of Canvassers for consideration in Friday's count. Brian Caskey, the state director of elections who works for Kobach, also said he only seen the news reports about the Secretary's comment. The call for recusal was Collier's biggest shot at Kobach since the Tuesday primary ended without a clear winner. Kobach said he has no plan to recuse himself if a second recount happens after the provisional ballots are counted. He said his office plays only an administrative role in that process and doesn't actually count the ballots. This is going to be a contentious race here, and the line is who will be the Republican standard bearer, Kobach or Collier. Evidently, some polling has said that Collier would be the toughest in the race. Many Collier voters have difficulty finding his name on the ballot and were forced to vote with provisional ballots. Now, there's a lot of... See, this is what happens when these so-called fraud experts, fraud activists are out there. It's what political scientists, political consultants call a flippable. In other words, Kobach is the person behind voter suppression and voter fraud outright. And that's what's happening in this election. And if you're going to do something like that, sort of like the big lie theory, you set up a national commission, and under that commission you claim that there are all these fraudulent votes out, although you didn't find any, but that covers up with your quote-unquote tracks. Pat Miller, political scientist at the University of Kansas, said the hotline was a clear indication that the Collier campaign is preparing for a potential court case. Obviously, what you are going to do with the hotline, you have to go to court, Miller said. He said Democrats and the ACP often use similar strategies in elections in which they are concerned about voter intimidation. The new numbers out, coincide with discovery of 100 more votes for Collier in Thomas County, that's near the Colorado border. Thomas County Clerk Shirley Harms confirmed that Collier received 522 votes on Election Day, rather than a total of 422 that had been reported by the Secretary of State's office. A lot of shenanigans going on here. She shared a scan of the form as she submitted to Kobach's office, which clearly showed 522 votes. That's an old trick. LBJ even used it. Report less or more votes than what you have. Last Thursday, Haskell County confirmed that it reported total votes were incomplete. Collier received 220 in the county, which was 17 more than previously reported. Kobach 257 votes in the county, which is 147 more than previously reported. The deputy Haskell County clerk, Emily Argo, said the county was still missing a precinct, which when sent initial results to the Secretary of State's office. Tuesday night, the county sent updated results later that night, but hundreds of new voters were not votes were not made public until Thursday. She stressed that these results are still unofficial until the county canvassing board meets. Throughout Thursday, the Kansas Secretary of State listed Kobach's votes from Wyandotte County as 2,737, while Collier had 1,538. But on Wednesday, Kobach picked up 32 votes from Wyandotte County tally compared to information posted there. Collier picked up 26. So this is kind of interesting here, county by county. I think we talked about Haskin. He confirmed Wyandotte County alerted him discrepancy in a handful of votes. Anyway, on Friday, totals posted on the Secretary of State's website will include mail-in ballots. Haskins has said, meaning the gap between the two candidates could possibly narrow or widen again. Well, it would depend, obviously, on what's going on here. Said the website would be updated throughout the day, so candidates can expect to see totals. Friday's totals will not include provisional ballots, which were not counted on the day of the election. The state's two most populous counties, Johnson and Sedgwick counties, will review combined 3,700 provisional ballots, which when they hold their canvass meeting, that'll be on Monday. But even then, the overall voting totals in the race will remain unknown. These three states and the most populous counties, Wyandotte and Douglas and Shawnee, want to hold their canvass until August the 16th. Non-citizen voting, in one more development, Kobach suggested a statement to the Star that's in Kansas City that non-citizens could vote in the primary. He's a liar. Earlier this year, it was established at trial that the judge's preliminary injunction allowed multiple non-citizens to register in Kansas. Her order undoubtedly had the same effect, as we do not know how many non-citizens voted in this Kobach. When a federal judge struck down a state law which he had designed that required voters to provide proof of citizenship, such as a birth certificate, passport, to register to vote. Kobach's campaign, who also worked as his official spokesman, did not immediately respond. Just because they didn't show passports and birth certificates doesn't mean any illegal, so-called illegal undocumented workers voted. In the 104th Kansas House District, that's Reno County, for example, challenger Wagner currently leads incumbent Becca by a single vote. So it's very, very close in many of these counties. And the reason we're going over this is the final numbers are as close as it was on election night. I would expect a recount to happen. That's from Mr. Arnold. Let's show who Mr. Arnold is. So the party will continue its turnout strategy for the general election. So this is out of Kansas. Happy to bring that forward. Now let's go to Larry Sabato. A failure to launch Kansas Republican gubernatorial contest and the history of incumbent governors' primary performance. Key takeaways here on Wednesday afternoon. The Governor Jeff Collier trailed the Secretary of State, Cobot, by 40.6 to 40.5. That is 1/10%. The final outcome is similar to the current vote. Collier's defeat would make history. His present margin of defeat stands the narrowest ever for an incumbent governor in a primary. Conversely, if Conyers wins, the base of the counting of outstanding votes and our recount, he could claim the record for the nearest primary winner. From the first state-wide primaries in the 19th century through Tuesday, incumbent governors have sought renomination in 916. Out of those attempts, incumbents won 830 times, a 91% renomination. Well, that is basically, a factor in most elections. Incumbents do win a re-election at alarming rates, although people in these polls say that government is going in the wrong direction, or for the congressional polls, polling at 10 or 20%. So it honestly doesn't matter. Are the 616 contested primaries with incumbents at 541 featured election incumbents and 75 unelected success incumbents. Anyway, as thick as a tick in Sunflower State, interesting, I know that before. The Republican primary for governor remains too close to call. No doubt about that. We covered that. We won't go over it again. Back in 2017, the Crystal Ball examined the electoral track record of successful incumbents in post-World War II era, and found that they performed worse than their regular elected counterparts in primaries and general election. Collier is one of 4 successful incumbents who stepped up to state governor in 2018 cycle and sought a full term. In other words, the others, Ivy down in Alabama, McMaster in South Carolina, and Kim Reynolds in Iowa, all won a renomination. Not coincidentally, Conyers has served the shortest time as governor prior to his primary up to a quarter, only taking office on the 31st of January. So he's been in office roughly now 7 months, not very long, after Brownback resigned to become DJ Trump's ambassador at large. If it sounds here like something for Brownback to do, let me just move through this. The Crystal Ball compares data on every, compiles data on every gubernatorial primary involving an incumbent in all 50 states up to and through Tuesday. All the data sets only indicate primaries that occur separately from the general election. This is the data excludes, Louisiana's gubernatorial election since 1975, because it's possible an outright win in the first round of the Pelican States. A system by gaining a majority of the all-party vote, that so-called jungle primary in Louisiana. Alaska and Washington have used such systems, and the top two primaries, like those currently used in California and Washington, are included. Unopposed primaries are also included in the overall count. For example, Jeb B.B. Bush did not appear on Florida's 2002 primary ballot because the Sunshine State does not list unopposed candidates in its primary ballot for general election. So some of the things that happened here, depending on obviously which state you were in. And we won't go into what the tables show here, but should Collier win after the outstanding votes are counted, and or after the recount, he would likely win by less than 1/10 of 1%, which would hand him the title for the closest ever primary winner for an incumbent governor. Well, he's a very, excuse me, a very short type here. I mean, in terms of how long he's been out there. There's another, Wally Hinkle. We remember Wally Hinkle at a .12. He was beat by Jay Hammond. Now, that was in 1978. Former governor left office to serve in Tricky Dick's cabinet, and then ran as a write-in candidate in the general election, finishing behind Hammond 39 to 26%. The party of this narrow group of primary winners has slightly more success in general elections. Interesting here. With the incumbents party losing 6 of 19, this makes sense intuitively because of incumbents reach the general election in each case, and incumbents tend to be stronger. Well, no doubt. For those early primaries, Tuesday's nomination contest, incumbent governors have sought nomination in, with 9 and 16 times a 91% of victory. Ray said the majority of those primaries featured elected incumbents. We already talked about those numbers, won't go to again. We read the conclusion. So in general, in Kansas, this is a long, drawn-out battle. Recounts looming. The credibility of Kobach is, Kobosh, that's what he'll become, is on the line. In a contest that roughly 50% of the Republicans voted against him, the question is, if he were going into a general election, where would he stand with the Democratic nominee? The odds would favor the Democratic nominee because many of the Republicans, even say 10 or 20%, would not support him, maybe perhaps even more. Excuse me, depending on how bitter the contest becomes. And it can become very bitter, especially in a court fight. Contest of the ballot, and that probably will come in because of all these shenanigans by Kobach's office, and these numbers that have been posted, numbers that have been manipulated, the question of ballots was smudged or not, the address, how the ballots were treated, etc., finding the name of Collier on ballots, all these things that will play in to scenario, particularly if you are dealing with a court case and a number to call for irregularities. In other words, they'll start canvassing Kansas to find people that were turned away from the polls or whatever situation perhaps could have been. That will also play into it. So again, I guess we revisit the term bloody Kansas. in terms of this election. That was around the time of John Brown. Let's move on here to the Washington Post. This is another trick from the DJ Trump's operation. It proposes further dismantling of the Affordable Care Act through Medicare. Is proposing to restart an initiative in the Affordable Care Act, which was intended to improve Medicare and slow spending in the vast federal insurance program for older people. Healthcare researchers hailed the model's promise to quality and efficiency, but the government data suggests it's not saving enough money. So the changes announced by the administration through their Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services would significantly curtail affordable care organizations. Can be teams of doctors, hospitals, and providers who become responsible for all the health care needs of a group of patients. Now, this is kind of similar to the Mayo Clinic's model, but not exactly. Under the Affordable Care Act, these teams have choices about the financial arrangement with the government. They can either collect bonuses if they provide better care at lower cost than regular Medicare programs, or they can collect greater amounts if they are willing to accept the risk of owing money in the case they end up overspending. More than 80% of the 512 teams in the Medicare Savings Program are using the bonus-only version with 300,000 clinicians and 10,000 patients taking part. A lot of people. Officials want to limit such teams, saying the federal data shows big data that this version has ended up costing Medicare extra money. Until now, the ACOs have been allowed 6 years in which they could take part without assuming responsibility for losses. So they want to change that. 607-page proposal in the Federal Register, that's where everything goes, predicts that fewer than 109 such organizations would be part of Medicare in a decade. According to the figures, nearly, 300 of these organizations have switched, have already been in the bonus-only version of the program for 2 more years. So it would have to switch or drop out after 6 month grace period. So in other words, the end of the bonus deal there, this expansion was in 2012. The delivery of care flows from sprawling and political polarized law. In the interview, Donald Berkwick, who led the CMS during the Obama administration, are important parts as the ACOs of a fleet of major experiments this country to shift. Now, payment of medical service, how to deliver the value of care. Now, this would also shift on the Medicare for All. Part of the problem is with these organizations and managed care type arrangements with private outfits, they all tend to fall short. And the reason that they fall short is the serious flaw in how they were organized in the first instance. On the current rules, these tell patients at the end of the year that their primary care doctor is part of such a team. According to Velmer, said that the new rule would also require patients to be sent written notices before choosing a physician. So it is an important part here. We'll follow up and see how it is going on. Let's see what else is going on here. Oh, Nancy Pelosi. Tech ads have a Nancy Pelosi in it. To start over again. 23 seat majority that the Republicans hold, and they are running the Pelosi ads. Period. And a lot of Democrats in Rashida Tlaib had at least 27 Democrat candidates to decline whether they would support Nancy Pelosi. Doesn't really matter. They have to win the majority to support anyone. And this is a big situation here. Pelosi is, 78, a Lieutenant Steny Hoyer is 79. This is definitely a generational thing. But also on the flip side, what it means is if Pelosi is under attack, she's doing her job very well. Yeah, no doubt time for generational change. This is one of the things when you have these attack ads. Tomorrow night we'll have Uncle Carl Rove's little commentary from the Wall Street Journal. Basically the same thing. They're running these attack ads attacking Nancy Pelosi. But the problem is Nancy Pelosi is the minority leader of the House. She's not responsible for the machinations that occurred on the little Paulie Ryan, who is leaving in a disgrace in the House of Representatives. In a race that was decided by 1,500 votes, it was probably a difference maker. Even if Democrats win the House in November, he added, it would be a difference between having a razor-thin majority and a governing majority. It's a lot easier to move legislation when you have a cushion of votes to work with. There's no doubt about that. You want to have extra seats, as many as quite is possible there. And these ads that these PACs are putting out, they're spending millions of dollars in Kansas against Paul Davis, one of more than 24 House Democratic candidates who are openly sparred with Pelosi. But they're trying to, as they say, tie these candidates up to Nancy Pelosi. Now, for their base, it works out there, or they try to make it work. This is a Danny O'Connor in Pennsylvania. Danny O'Connor in his district. What was that? District 19. O'Connor said he did not support Pelosi. That's the same stance of Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, who won a special election in Ohio. That's where he is, outside of Columbus. Balderson is the only thing he has going for him is Nancy Pelosi. What's a sad commentary on the American people, you can use a symbol such as Nancy Pelosi. And what they're doing there is very simple. She's an effective leader, no doubt about that, out of San Francisco. And they're using all of the basic things. Their xenophobia, you name it. Types of gender inequality, chauvinism, nativism. I mean, it's a long line of isms that these people are activating. It's sort of like the immigration battle. We've had immigration in this country for a very, very long time. And it was slated towards Europeans that were coming to the country. Now the majority of people that are coming to the country are black and browns. And that is the reason for these spotlight on the 1,000-mile border that stretches from Texas to Baja, California. That's a border down between Arizona and California in the desert. So you have this emphasis there on people coming across the border when in fact most people are coming by aeroplane. I almost said TWA, but they're out of business. But anyway, I'm not sure what they're flying in on, but they're nonetheless flying in and overstaying their visas in some instances, etc. But the situation on BostonRed.org, we have a lot of statistics over there, and I'll start trying to go over some of it, some of the estimates they have, the number of undocumented workers in the country, the number of immigrants in the country, etc., how these estimates come about. So we're seeing a lot of things going on here, but this whole emphasis on that is because of the color line involved in the immigrants. There's no doubt about this. And this is why that they use the native nativist situation. Very similar to what's happening, and we'll have this tomorrow night on the Monday Morning Quarterback, talking about the NFL, the agreements. They don't have an agreement yet. They had exhibition games on Thursday night, and some of the players took a kneel, and they were not penalized because they have not worked out that part of the agreement as of yet. So we're out here. Let's see if we can. This is preseason with some protests, and just over some of the teams here that were involved in it. They're in negotiation with the NFL Players Association. The Dolphins, wide receiver, I won't name these people. Tampa Bay, evidently there. The Philadelphia Eagles, Malcolm Jenkins involved there. But various other people, Jenkins and other Eagle players wore shirts on the field before the game. Now, citing statistics about prison population and voting rights of former prisoners. So this informational situation here, and this is a good thing, period. In Seattle, some Seahawks players were involved, reportedly were in the tunnel locker room for the anthem. In San Francisco, some players are there and put a fist up. So in other words, this is will continue on no matter what DJ Trump has to say and other people. They have got into a player protest during the anthem at last week's Hall of Fame game. That was between, we missed that one, the Ravens of Baltimore and the Bears. That's in Canton, Ohio, which opens preseason. And no player protests are there. So, in other words, you'll see some of the protests out there started by Colin Kaepernick, and we'll talk more about this. Started reading this book by Howard, what's his name, Brian, about sports and patriotism, etc. We will review the book when we finish the book, and this whole history. This goes back to Ali, it goes back to Tommy Smith, etc., and Paul Robeson. What happened there? How they marginalized Paul Robeson? Say that, and then of course Jackie Robinson came along with a smile, but that was not all but what Jackie Robinson was about. So we see these trends are going here, and politicians, is there a causal relationship between the treatment of Nancy Pelosi, a woman from San Francisco, and the racism in sports? No doubt about that. Sexism is out there, and they'll put her face on that, and the face of the next leader of the Democratic Party. Whereas McConnell, well, people have forgot about him. I didn't see anything on Paulie Ryan. Commercials run because he's leaving. So you can't run a commercial on him when he is disappearing, but there should be some type of commercial on the number of these Republicans that, as they said, bowed out and went south. Nonetheless, these are scores from Thursday night. Atlanta was in Washington 6-3. The Twins were in Cleveland 5-4. The Padres were in Milwaukee, Padres 8-4. The Rangers were in New York, Yankees 7-3. The Sox were in Toronto again. The Blue Jays 8-6. Sorry about that. Still make that number very, very light. The Orioles and Rays 5-4. Rays over the Orioles. The Mariners and Astros in Texas. Mariners pulled one out here. 8-2. It looks like 6. Have to make sure. Yeah, 8-6. Paxton was a winner there. Anyway, the Dodgers and Rockies, a game I tuned into. Dodgers 8-5. Dodgers had 13 hits, no errors, and the Rockets had 10 hits and 1 error. The Rockies, I'm sorry, not the Rockets. turn them into a basketball team. They probably wish they had. Mr. Davis blew his save, and that was the end of that situation. It was a game, and we don't have the full line score here. It was a game that was tied 5-5, and in the ninth, things fell apart for Mr. Davis. And finally, the Pirates and Giants in San Francisco. It was all Pirates 10-5. Yeah. It was 10-5. I'll get these numbers straight here where they'll be. What they do is this is ESPN. The winner is in bold. The other number is lighter, just where the eye can pick it up. But actually, it's better when I moved away from the screen. So to recap, we had the Kansas election there, which is still up in the air. There's also an election, the O'Connor election in Ohio. Not really certain where we are on that particular one. Let's just take a quick look over at Real Clear Politics. We looked at some of the polling. Usually what happens is on the week it was on Saturday night, Sunday morning, we go over these polls. But I'll just take a quick look here. And we had some polling out on a Thursday. The Virginia Senate race, didn't say much about that. Mr. Keene is ahead by 23 points, not even worth recording. The presidential approval ratings, Rasmussen 47, DJ Trump, and at 46 at the Reuters ISO poll. And the generic ballot here, Democrats 2. This is very, very interesting here. And congressional approval rating at 24. We've been looking at these generic ballot races, ballots here, according to International Business Daily. Democrats and Republicans are tied up on the generic ballot, and let's see what. Democrats up by 3 at YouGov. So all this is in the margin of error. There's no doubt about that. So when you start looking at generic ballot, don't put a lot into it, because in fact, this is August. We'll start to see. We'll see if any changes anyone pulls away in late September, early October, and we'll see where we end up. Nonetheless, have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you on the week that was, and later on the Monday Morning Quarterback. And incidentally, we have some new articles, the immigration article, over at bostonred.org. Starting to put more materials there, finally, after about a year or so hiatus. And we'll have an open source report this weekend. We'll be talking about the Black Hat Conference. We'll put this in. And some of the things that are going on there, particularly in machine learning. And we have several other things in the can. Won't go into all about sports. We have to do some things there. In our international program, we've had President Mugabe in his speech. We still have to get that out. And where the election is after the violence of some of the people that were going to pour millions of dollars into the country are now holding back. We have not forgot Zimbabwe. Anyway, that'll do it for us.